movies! So in addition to lots of Star Wars talk this week, which Stevie, being a little Sith Lord himself, still hasn't seen, so we weren't able to talk that much about it with him. But actually, yeah, I mean, yeah, so lots of Star Wars talk. The only movie that I actually sat down and watched this week was actually today. Morgan and I sat down and watched Danny Boyle, Aaron Sorkin's Steve Jobs biopic, which I need to see again. I have vaguely negative feelings about it on first watch. I feel like Aaron Sorkin's kind of worst tendencies were at display here. A little bit too much cleverness for cleverness' sake. Weird kind of hindsight, like, oh, well, you know, things are going to be in the future, but we know that now, and so we're going to... It's things that bother me about the newsroom, basically, where it's like, well, they should have done the news this way, which is very easy to say when you're in the future, and I felt like the story suffered from that a little bit, where it's like, you know, Steve Jobs being like, I'm going to create something that can fit in your pocket and has 1,000 songs, and it's like, yeah, okay, we all know what the iPod became. That's fun that he's telling that to his daughter first. But Morgan and I had a good discussion after the movie, and we think there's a few things. I'll just very briefly, let's say I'm going to give it 3 stars for now with a confidence of 2. I might actually rate it a little lower than that. But first of all, very well acted. Kate Winslet, Michael Fassbender, Seth Rogen doing a really good performance. Everyone acted this really well. The setup is very interesting. I'm always happy to see something that's playing with the form. It was somewhere in between like a play and a movie because it felt very verisimilitude-y, you know. There's 3 acts basically, each one's taking place in real time right before different product launches. And I read or listened to Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs book a while ago, and so I see what Aaron Sorkin's doing here, where he's trying to compress a lot of backstory and character dynamics into these 3 segments, but it didn't feel particularly cumulative to me. Or Morgan, really. There was a through line, like, yes, it's about, you know, at first he's denying the parentage of his daughter, then he's like kind of having a good relationship with his daughter, but who knows, and then it seems like by the end things are really rocky, but then he's like, no, you're the most important person in my life. And it felt a little bit schmaltzy, and it felt a little bit like the movie was telling us how we should feel about Steve Jobs. What I was looking forward to in this movie was the dichotomy of seeing brilliant, incredible genius and horrible, awful, despicable person. And the movie didn't do much of that in either direction. And I don't mean it needs to be sensationalized. Like, there's plenty of real, actual things that Steve Jobs did that fits into both of those categories. And the movie felt a little bit too paint by numbers for me. Again, beautifully acted, but I look at something like The Social Network, which on repeat viewings, you know, it's probably actually in my top 20 favorite movies of all time. Like, I could watch that movie 100 times and there's more to discover in all of it. And I don't care, here's the thing, I don't care how historically accurate a movie is, unless it's, you know, really doing damage to people. But like The Social Network isn't actually a super accurate, you know, story of how Facebook was created. I mean, the impression there is that Mark Zuckerberg was really beat up about a girl who broke up with him and basically was like, well, I'll show her, I'll make a social network where I'm king, blah, blah, blah. And for all, you know, intents and purposes, I don't think that that really was it at all. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was not obsessed with finals clubs, as far as I can tell. He didn't care about them at all. He also, yes, may have had this bad interaction with the Erica Albright character, but he also very shortly after started dating the girl who now is his wife and who he just had a daughter with and who he's, you know, dedicating a bunch of Facebook shares to. But that's a whole different story. I don't care that The Social Network isn't a super accurate Facebook origin story. It is a brilliantly written, acted, shot story with excellent music by Trent Reznor, and I am on that journey every time I watch that movie, and I'm constantly discovering new things, new nuances, ways that everything fits together, and that movie just sings. And this felt a little bit more, the Steve Jobs, Danny Boyle biopic by Aaron Sorkin, felt a little bit more piecemeal, a little bit less cohesive. I didn't feel like there was a driving energy to the whole thing. It didn't feel like it was building to anything. Each time there was an act break, we'd get, you know, little news clippings and like, this happened, Steve Jobs ousted from Apple, goes to start own company, oh, next. And it didn't feel like we were being propelled into anything. Like, it would kind of end and be like, okay, that's one story. And then it's weird because then we're jumping ahead a bunch of time, but it's like, yeah, you remember 10 years ago when that person was really mean to me? Yeah, I do. Oh, that was awful. And it's, so there was kind of a repetitive nature, even though they're covering a lot of time and a lot of ground. And characters that I thought were going to come off as much more nuanced felt very one-dimensional. Like, I know Aaron Sorkin spent a lot of times talking to Steve Wozniak, and then Seth Rogen, you know, acting very well in this movie, made Steve Wozniak feel very one-note. And I don't blame him, I blame Aaron Sorkin. It was like all Steve Wozniak cared for, you know, 25 years, or I guess we're covering like a 15-year period or something like that. All he seemed to care about was, come on, Steve, you really should, you know, give all the developers credit. Come on, say their name. Just acknowledge that the Apple II was important. And it feels very one-note and kind of boring. And I just found myself, you know, we're watching the movie and I'm trying to hold on to Alistair at the same time, and I didn't feel that compelled to, like, you know, basically there's sometimes when Alistair wants to stand up and move around and go from room to room and that kind of thing. And I was wondering if the movie was going to hold my attention well enough that I, like, didn't want to get up with him. And the fact of the matter is that there were a lot of scenes where I was like, yeah, whatever. I had no problem, like, walking in and out, and I didn't feel like I was missing that much. So, yeah, it didn't feel like that tight of a movie to me. I don't feel like I learned anything about Steve Jobs I didn't already know. I don't think there was anything particularly revelationary about bringing this wonderfully written biography to screen, where, you know, by compressing to just these key character dynamics, that things were expressed in a new way. You know, obviously the film can do wonderful things for adapting books. The Martian, Lord of the Rings, you know, these are things where once you can take those wonderfully written words and make them visual, it can be an incredible experience. That didn't really happen here. It was kind of cool to see, you know, some of these items that I wasn't that familiar with. The original Macintosh, the Apple II, and the next perfectly square box in the flesh, so to speak. But yeah, again, it didn't add up to that much for me. And I understand the contrivance, and I think structurally it's very interesting to set this up as backstage before these 3 product launches, but at a certain point it just felt ridiculous that Steve Jobs is covering so many different things in his life in the 10 minutes before a product launch begins. Like, why are you having a fight with your daughter right before each of these 3 events, and then why are you willing to stop an event and make thousands of people wait because you want to harass your daughter about having her show you an essay that she wrote, you know, at Harvard? And again, like, there's a way this all could have worked, and it could have felt like it was building to this. And again, like The Social Network, to keep bringing it up again, like the character relationships in that, they're so finely tuned and crafted, and you know, like, that even though there's a lot of scenes you're not seeing, there's evolutions in the way these characters interact with each other, especially Eduardo and Mark. And by the time Eduardo's realizing he's betrayed at the end, it's heartbreaking, and it works so well. And then watching Justin Timberlake as Sean Parker in there is, you know, this like little devil on Mark's shoulder. It's really powerful. It works so well. And there's nothing here like that. It doesn't build to anything, and the way that he changes the way he's talking to Steve, to Andrew, to Kate Winslet's character, to his daughter, it doesn't feel like one thing led to another. It just feels like, here's how they're talking now, here's how they're talking now. This is pretty constant throughout. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so let's just say, yeah, 3 stars with confidence of 2.